There is no clearer example of plain and simple short-term politics at play than on New START. And we simply can't afford to let that rule the day, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. But many of today's conservatives, especially those in elected office, are facing enormous pressure to choose politics over governing on issue after issue. Too many have already decided to surrender to the most extreme voices on the right at the expense of basic integrity. But New START is so widely acknowledged to be the right move that it presents conservatives in Congress with a clear choice. They can choose politics or they can choose governing. They can choose Mitt Romney or they can choose the entire U.S. military establishment. They can choose a world with greater risk of nuclear disorder or one with less. On this issue, there is no simple in-between. Some have already apparently decided that denying the president a victory is more important than America's national security interests. But I know there are many who don't share that view. And to them I say the consequences of choosing politics over governing are very real. But the failure to ratify New START would have needless, terribly destabilizing consequences. 2 weeks ago, as John mentioned, in a politically charged and factually loose op-ed in the Washington Post, former Governor Mitt Romney stirred the pot when he called on fellow Republicans to reject the treaty. Well, let's just imagine for a moment what would happen if he got his way. First, as I mentioned, we would significantly handicap our ability to assess Russia's nuclear activities, and as a consequence would face added complications planning our own. And given that there are still nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert, the last thing we should want to do is to create that uncertainty. But from a broader perspective, what international unity currently exists to stop nuclear proliferation, to counter nuclear terrorism, and to confront Iran would fray and possibly even collapse. Should New START fail, and the United States follow through on what many conservatives advocate, that is, building and testing new nuclear weapons, American credibility on nuclear issues would evaporate. Countries belonging to the NPT would then ask a very simple question. If the United States is unwilling to live up to its commitments, why should we live up to ours? And if the United States is unwilling to ratify even a modest arms control treaty, what obligation do we have to maintain the status quo and not pursue nuclear weapons ourselves? That is how we fall past the nuclear tipping point, the point at which the nuclear dam breaks and countries large and small, from Latin America to Southeast Asia, from the Middle East to Africa, decide that their national security interests would be enhanced by possessing the bomb. This hyper-nuclearized world is one that President Kennedy worried would come to pass. In 1960, he predicted that there would be 20 nuclear nations by 1964. Today, there are fewer than 10. The creation of an international non-proliferation regime, though imperfect, has largely kept the nuclear dam from breaking. Rejecting New START has the real potential to push the world into a state of nuclear anarchy.